So what's next for OPEC and the global oil market? Well, to find out, let's welcome Ellen Wald, president of Transversal Consulting, joining us live from Jacksonville, Florida. So let's start with your take on OPEC's decision to roll over the current production levels.
Well, this decision was basically foreordained. They've essentially been doing the same thing, rolling this over time and time again. And it really doesn't do all that much to help buoy oil prices at this point, especially with all of the concerns about demand.
So then why do this? What does OPEC have to gain from keeping this course?
Well, right now they're basically treading water. What they have to gain is really probably just keeping Russia in the fold. Russia's really the big wild card here, because without Russia, OPEC has much less influence than they would otherwise. And even though Russia has not really been a very trustworthy partner, they've cheated on their production quotas time and again, this is still an effort to keep Russia involved in the production cut agreement.
And you raise an interesting issue, because a lot of people wonder whether, a lot of these countries do end up sticking to these rules that OPEC is setting. So which countries are most affected by OPEC staying this course, and how will they adapt?
Well, really, Saudi Arabia is the one that's making most of the cuts. They're actually cutting more than they have to cut under this agreement. But other countries like Iraq would really like to produce more and isn't. There are some other countries that are cutting a little bit. Kazakhstan is one of them. But overall, it's really almost an exercise in futility at this point, because most of the cuts are actually coming from Iran and Venezuela, which really don't have much control over their own production at this point.
And let's also talk about the OPEC Plus Charter, which formally recognized these non-OPEC member countries. How is that significant, and what are the implications?
Well, it's significant because it does, in some respects, tie this group together. It formalizes it, and they feel that this will help them stabilize the market. It's not really clear whether the market thinks that this group is anything special, but they do feel that it will help them stabilize the market going forward.
And one country that might affect that, the U.S., according to recent U.S. data, the country is producing about 12.1 million barrels a day. How is increasing U.S. production affecting the role of OPEC and its impact on the industry?
This has really weakened OPEC's ability to affect the market in a major way. If you look at how U.S. production has increased since 2016, when this whole OPEC Plus group got started, there's really been a very marked increase. I think it's about maybe over 3 million barrels a day, a very large increase. And it's basically compensated for almost everything that OPEC has taken off the market. So U.S. production is really helping keep a lid on prices right now.
And we also know that President Xi and President Trump recently called a trade truce, and overall stock markets were optimistic. Does any of that optimism spill over into the oil markets?
In fact, it's actually probably what's affecting the oil market most right now. When you look at how things play out on the oil market reacts very strongly to trade news. So when we saw an increase on Tuesday and earlier in the week on Monday, when we saw that increase, it was really mostly due to positive news on the trade front, not so much due to OPEC's decision to curb supply further.
And as we look ahead, what about renewable energy? How much is that factoring into what OPEC is doing?
Renewable energy is big in terms of it's really it's much more just they say that it's big. It gets a lot of press, but it's really not making much of an impact or a dent in terms of total and overall energy consumption in the world. It's still a very small part. People like to look at how fast it's increasing, and it is increasing fast, but it was starting from so little that those increases aren't really making a dent in terms of total electricity consumption in the world.
So if you had to pick certain factors that will affect oil prices the most for the second half of the year, what would they be?
I think it's absolutely trade. It's really 100% trade sentiment, because if there's a positive trade sentiment going forward, then people will start to have a better feeling about demand. It's really putting a lid on people's perceptions of what demand is going to be over the next half of a year. And so if there's positive movement towards trade, towards resolution on this trade front, then I do think we will see people being more confident about growing demand, and oil prices will respond. respond.
And in terms of some unresolved issues, obviously you mentioned Iran and Venezuela. How do you see oil prices faring amid these geopolitical tensions, especially with these major oil producers?
Well, this has been a really interesting time for geopolitical influence on the oil market, because typically when you look at what goes on in the Persian Gulf, you would expect that any kind of tension, particularly issues that directly affect the safety of tankers actually in the Persian Gulf, would really cause oil prices to skyrocket. And that's really a thing of the past right now, because everyone is so focused on this potential for demand weakening that these incidents don't seem to be having the same effect that they used to.
All right, Ellen Wald, they're president of Transversal Consulting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.